IVM.
Hi, I'm Satyajit.
Hi, I'm Rajita.
Welcome to Paperback by the Open Library Project.
We have as our guest today Alisha Rajpal, author of Has Everything Been Done, which we deep dive into the first half of the podcast.
In the second half, we also discuss The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, Just Kids by Patti Smith, The Art of Recklessness by Dean Young, and Method and Madness by Alice LaPlante.
Alisha discusses her experiences in Bombay and New York City, her love for writing, tools for budding writers, Smith's struggles as a young adult finding her way into the world, both as a woman and a writer, and how an idea without stickiness will never tip.
Let's dive in.
What do we have here? He began to read the piece of paper. EXT. Exterior, sir. EXT is an abbreviation for the word exterior. I am the dean of this college, Satluj. I obviously know what EXT stands for. It seemed that the dean, in fact, did not know what the three letters stood for because he cleared his throat and started to read the sheet of paper for a second time. Exterior. A sunny day. A marketplace. A pushcart housing brightly colored produce is manned by a street vendor. Tangerines, apples, pears, and limes are stacked in pyramids. A lady interacts with the street vendor. Are these apples sweet? The vendor says, Madam, I am only the seller. But the farmer I purchased these from tended to these with great care. These should be sweet. The lady replies, No guarantee? Then how can I tell if these will be sweet or no? If they are not sweet, I am not coming back to buy fruits from you. A young boy runs up to the lady and tugs at her kurta. Mom, he says, I want to go home. The lady turns to look at the boy. The lady attempts to calm him down. The vendor says, Madam, do you think your son will grow up to be a good person? The lady turns and is visibly enraged. What? What did you just say? Vendor. Madam, if you can't guarantee that your son will grow up to be a good person after you spend your whole life raising him, then how can a farmer guarantee that the fruits he has tended to will turn out to be sweet? The dean finished reading the paper, he put the paper down, and asked the peon to bring him a cup of tea. Satluj sighed, and for some reason he felt a great urge to use the restroom. It is more nuanced when you see it on stage, sir. The students have poured their souls into it. Yes, we have a girl playing the role of a male fruit vendor, but she's a brilliant actor.
Thank you, Alisha Rajpal. That was an excerpt from her book, Has Everything Been Done? We'll be right back after these short messages.
Hey Amit, what do you think about starting a dating podcast?
To be honest, I think that idea is kind of garbage.
Sure, just like dating then.
Oh, we could call it dating as garbage.
We could talk to people about their sad dating lives.
Okay, I'm not so sure about that.
And we can discuss our terrible sex lives.
Okay, definitely not that.
We could talk about how there's no such thing as love and it's all a load of crap and nothing can ever truly bring meaning to our lives.
Okay, you might need some help there.
Alright, it's a yes then. Dating is garbage. Every week, we break down all things from dating apps, social media, texting, calling, dating rules, and more with some really cool people.
Episodes out every Thursday on the IVM Podcasts app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. This is Paperback by the Open Library Project. I am your co-host Satyajit, otherwise known as Onion Knight in most food circles. I am hosting this podcast with my co-founder at the Open Library Project, Rachita Sharma.
Hi guys, my name is Rachita and I'm an ex-banker who gave up my banking profession to follow my passion and run libraries across the world. The Open Library Project is a non-fiction book library service offered to businesses on a subscription basis. We're trying to move away from the run-of-the-mill library concept and setting up rotational and locational curated libraries at co-working spaces, corporates and business incubators. The idea here is to create value, build a knowledge community, and encourage a growth mindset amongst our members.
Today we have with us on the show Alisha Rajpal, author of Has Everything Been Done? She is also a TEDx speaker. Welcome to the show, Alisha.
Oh, thank you for speaking.
It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here.
And Since, you started with an excerpt, before we get into the book, tell us, what inspired you to start writing, and how did you get to this book?
So I've always wanted to write. Since I was little, I just love to read and write, and the two sort of move hand in hand. So it's just something that I've always wanted to do, and when I grew up, I realized that I also need a career, so
Right.
I figured the two should just meet.
Excellent. So tell us more about the excerpt that you read.
Sure. So this is actually a story within a story. The setup of this particular story, first of all, it's titled Vegetarians Can Kill People Too.
Oh, interesting.
Nice.
I'm a vegetarian also, so
All
it's
right.
not meant to be offensive in any way. But the reason that I started writing the story is that I always hear people talking about what makes people good and bad. So if you don't drink, or you're not promiscuous, or if you're a vegetarian, it's just assumed that you're probably a good person, which really, that can't be a measure for goodness. And
Those are random metrics
Exactly.
to measure goodness, right?
Exactly. So, which is why I wanted to write this story, which is actually about a lot of things. But one of the things it's about is just freedom of expression. So it's set against the background of a young boy's life, and he's at the brink of becoming a man.
Okay.
And later on in the story, we also explore sexuality as it pertains to him. And in this particular situation, what he has done is he's written this play, and he's really trying to put it up in his college. He wants to produce it, and he is trying to convince his dean that, let me produce this play. It's a good story. It's a good story to tell. And later on in the story, the dean says to him that, you know what? Even a brilliant play without an audience is just people talking to each other. So know your audience. And
Yeah,
right.
he thinks the play is rather controversial.
For the audience that it's being presented to.
That is being presented to you, which is basically just this community of a college and teachers and
Right,
faculty
right.
and parents. And so it's that turmoil of, trying to get his vision out there. And
So-
I don't want to give away whether the play gets produced or not, because I'd rather everybody read it.
Yes, everybody should read the book. And
Thank you.
so, like you said, you have to select your audience. So who would you recommend this book to? Who would be the ideal audience for this book?
So the great thing about this book, in my opinion, is that because it's 10 different stories
Right.
in one book. Each story will take you to a different ecosystem, and each story explores a different genre. So for that reason alone, I don't want to bucket my reader base, because while writing this book, I realized that I don't know whose hands it's going to end up in. So I can't really write keeping in mind an audience. I can only write keeping in mind what I want to say. It's been very interesting since the book has been out for, I think, over a month now in the market, and there's some stories which I thought might work with younger audiences, but I find that even parents or people of a different age group are liking it. So
Great.
I don't know if I can bucket my audience as such. I think it's really depends on personal perspective and tastes.
Yeah, so I really liked the way the stories are presented. It really takes you out of the day, cuts you off, gives you a
thank
break. And it's really short stories, right? So it doesn't take
Yes.
that long to get through them.
And you have these subliminal messages, which go with
Tell
the
us
stories.
a little more
yeah.
about these
Yeah,
codes
in
that
fact, you have actually in a story mentioned a lot of rape victims,
Yes.
like Jessica and Arushi and all. So tell us about the thought behind that. And
Yes, so so I think with this book in general, I started writing it not so much as having something to say, but rather as just responding to the world around me and things that I've observed. So the story that you're talking about, it's called The Year 3000, and it's the last, so it's sort of the finale of the book, and the story takes place on New Year's Eve in the year 2999. So it's like the year 3000 is about to begin, and the context is that this family is celebrating New Year's Eve, or they're preparing to celebrate New Year's Eve, and sort of the world as it looks then, and more importantly India as it looks then. And my biggest hope for the future is that hopefully at least by then, our country is a safer home for women, and rape is not something that is as rampant as it is today. So just to pay homage to some of the women, and out of respect to not forgetting their stories,
Right.
I used their names as the names of the characters of my protagonists. So some of the girls are named Asifa, Arushi, Jessica, Manjula, just women that have been murdered and or raped in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah.
Just as a Indian girl, these and every story of rape feels new and hurtful. So I didn't want to use. The story doesn't touch on their lives. It's still a very much a fictional story. I just use their names as small.
It's just like an homage you're paying to.
Yes,
just
a small effort.
Right.
Yes.
So tell us a little more about the book and maybe a couple of more stories that you would like to touch upon, or like the themes of these stories, without going too much into detail.
Of course. So the first story in the book starts in the year 2000.
Okay.
Which is sort of, in many ways, a mirror image of the year 3000. Again, it's a family celebrating or preparing to celebrate New Year's Eve. And if you'd remember, in the year 2000, or just as we were all preparing for the year 2000, there was a major hijack that happened, and of course we were experiencing a different reality, and there wasn't social media and as many outlets to know what was going on. So the story really started from there. So that story sort of explores my worry and my fear of terrorism, and that kind of starts it. And in that way, I think each of these stories talks about just one thing. So one story we talk about sexuality, in another we talk about terrorism, in one we talk about just race identity and things like that. So just different things, like I was saying earlier, that my response to the world as I observe it.
Yeah.
And so each story does explore a completely different theme, and the protagonists are all in different age groups and social stratas.
But very real and very relevant to our times. Yeah.
Thank you. I hope so. That's it. That's my
it really does,
goal.
Pick up really important issues, and so it's not right in your face, but you get a sense of what you mean throughout the book. So that's excellent.
So.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. That makes me happy.
Great. So I think we're going to move on to a few other books that may have influenced you as a writer, as well as that's got you to your journey so far. So we'll be right back after these messages.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you aren't following us on social media, please make sure that you are. We are IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you are following us on social media, I'm sure you know that it's our 4th anniversary this month. Yeah, IVM is 4 years old. We've done 3,500 plus episodes of content, and it's been an amazing ride with a lot of fun guests, a lot of fun content, and a lot of great hosts. We'd like to thank all of our hosts, because without them, we wouldn't really be doing all that much. Also, I'd mentioned over the last couple of weeks that we're running a survey right now, a listener survey. It's on ivmpodcast.com/survey. If you have not filled that out, please do fill it up. It'll help us figure out what is working for you, what's not working, and will give us some information that we can use to get some advertising on the show. On The Scene and the Unseen, Amit Verma is joined by author Srinath Raghavan. They discuss the recent tensions between India and Pakistan, its historical context, and what the future may hold. We're launching a new show called States of Anarchy about global affairs, hosted by foreign policy enthusiast Hamsini Hariharan. On How to Citizen, we move on to Chapter 8, Confronting Marginalization. Meghnad and Shreyas are joined by creative director Joel Pereira, who draws from his professional and personal experiences to discuss the topic. On Advertising is Dead, Varun talks to executive editor of Rolling Stone, Nirmika Singh, about new age journalism, what it takes to be a music journalist in India, the rise of Indian hip-hop, and a lot more. Also check out last week's episode with Gaurav Kapoor, founder of Oak Tree Sports and former VJ, who talks about his journey to becoming a sports presenter and what's missing in our sports content. On Golgappa, Tripti is in conversation with musician Karan Chitra Deshmukh. He talks about how he got into playing instruments and gives a glimpse of his talent on the show. On Geek Fruit, Tejas and Jishnu talk about their favorite classic TV shows and give their opinions on which can be potentially revived. Also check out last week's bulletin, where they talk about IVM's 4th anniversary and their favorite shows on our network. And with that, let's continue with your show.
Welcome back. We still have with us Alisha Rajpal. Hi, Alisha.
Hi.
So we're going to be talking about Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. I think this is the first book that we wanted to discuss with you. Tell me, what about this book stood out for you, or why you like this book?
Yes. So actually, I only finished reading this book a couple of days ago, so it's very much fresh in my mind.
Okay.
So I think this was, if Wikipedia is to be believed, I'm kidding. This was Malcolm Gladwell's debut book that he co-authored with John Decker. And I think in this book he talks about multiple things, but the reason that it was fascinating, or my reason for choosing it, is that it's not my favorite book that he's written, but just seeing that the type of writing he was doing in his first book is quite impressive. And in this book, he talks about something that's really interesting, and the central theme remains is stickiness.
Right.
So how like trends or ideas stick.
Yeah.
Right.
And he breaks it down into who starts ideas and how these ideas spread amongst youth and then eventually other groups of people. And he talks about connectors, people who are not perhaps excelling in any one thing themselves, but they have immense people skills. And these are just individuals in the community. They could be professors, they could be designers, they could be anybody, but they're just so well connected and they have such large social circles that sometimes even unintentionally they tend to spread ideas just because they're constantly interacting with so many people. And then he also talks about mavens, which he says are people that are very focused in their interest in something. So maybe he gives an example of someone who just knows how to pick a good bargain. So if they're going to, buy a television, they'll tell you exactly where to buy the television, what date to buy it, when the sales are good, how you can get the best price for this product, things of that nature. And then he talks about how all these people, connectors, mavens, and other influencers,
and the salespeople,
who like ultimately come together to make an idea really stick and just explode. So I remember in the beginning of the book he talked about this the rise of hush puppies, puppy shoes, which sort of had like died down and they weren't as cool anymore. But then these kids in New York and Soho started wearing them almost in an ironic fashion, and then because they were wearing it, the shoes kind of became cool again, and then the shoes ultimately became popular again, just because these cool kids were wearing them. So it was just interesting, especially now that I have a product of my own that I'm trying to bring to audiences. It was a good learning experience for me to see how I can
reach that tipping point.
Yes, reach that tipping point, because unfortunately I don't think I'm a maven or a connector, but I will start, or at least try to be.
We all start somewhere, right? And you eventually become whatever you become.
Definitely.
So tell me, from this book, is there anything that you're applying directly when you're now like you said, you do have a product which is your book.
Yes.
And are you applying anything to get more stickiness out of the book?
I am. So in this book, Gladwell also talked about the success of another book that ended up being a bestseller, which is the Yaya Sisterhood. And this author that penned this book, I apologize if I didn't get the name exactly right, but what she does is she goes to different venues and she hosted book readings and group discussions, and how the Yaya Sisterhood turned into this book club phenomena where women, granted this was also before the rise of social media, so people still were participating in book clubs. Much deeply, but this book gave rise to this sort of book club culture amongst women. So women were finding other women to read the book with, talk about their experiences, and almost create like a sisterhood amongst themselves, with the book enabling that. So it became something more than the book, which I thought was really fascinating. And what I have been doing for the past month or so now is I try to find schools and colleges that will have me, and I try to sit down with students and talk to them about all 10 different stories, why I wrote them. We'll read a few lines and I ask them to, ask me any question. It doesn't have to be about writing or reading, but it could even just be, so if in a story about sexuality, if they have, certain questions or struggles. So we just kind of open it into a forum, and I find that's something that I've learned from the book, is just to engage with people.
Wow, that's amazing that you're learning something and you're applying it straight away.
Yes, directly. Thank you.
So was that also the topic of your TEDx talk, or what did you speak about in your TEDx talk?
So with TEDx, you can't really push your own product or your company, which is just one of their rules, and that wasn't even my intention. It's of course such a prestigious platform and
to speak on.
I wasn't even I was really humbled to be considered for it. I chose to spoke about reading and how reading, especially in the 2010s is no longer a habit, but rather an exercise.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
our attention is so often stretched. It happens with me too. I mean, I'm a writer. This is my trade. And yet I know how easy it is to just, melt into this quicksand of the phone where, if someone's texting you or you just watch Maggie videos on Instagram. And,
The endless scrolling of videos, because you don't even have to scroll anymore. It's on auto scroll, right?
How to make 3-ingredient ice cream or 4-ingredient pancakes. It's a vortex, really.
Yeah.
So it really, we need motivation to go to the gym. We need motivation to read, I feel.
Right.
And so that's what I chose my TEDx talk to be about, is that even though it is an exercise, we must try to pursue it, because like all exercises, it does reward the mind and the body.
Wow, that's amazing.
Thank you.
Excellent.
The next book we're moving on to is Just Kids by Patti Smith.
Oh, yes.
So what about this book stood out for you?
So I had a very interesting experience with this book, which is why I chose to talk about it here today. I read it first in college, and when I went to college to be a writer, and we'd often have these workshops with some of our classmates that we led by a professor. And we were a group of, I think, 10 girls or so that were in this particular classroom. And we do these workshops, and we were assigned this book to read. And it's a memoir, actually. And Patti Smith continues to be just a great artist and a writer. Even today, I think she recently released M Train, which is, it's on my shelf to read next. And this book in particular, Smith talks about her life before she even came to New York City, and New York City is sort of her playground, and where she really found her talent and honed it in. And the reason I found it interesting, also because I was reading it, as a young girl, figuring out what I wanted to do, is that there are instances in this book, I won't lie, where I almost found myself being almost cynical. Of course, Patti was growing up in the 70s and 60s. It was a very different world.
Mm-hmm.
They would do things like go to secondhand shops and buy fabric and art supplies and spend all day just making art. And I was like, who can afford to do this in New York City? It's crazy. But, the interesting thing about this book, and why I think everyone that's listening should read it, is that through this book you will get to meet all the sort of idols of the 20th century you can think of. Because during this time, while she was in New York, she met Andy Warhol.
Wow.
She met William Burroughs. She was, she saw Jim Morrison in concert. She made music in Jimi Hendrix's studio. It's crazy. Like, she even met...
Wow.
Yeah, she met Dali.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and she just had these casual conversations. But she was, wearing second-hand shirts that she bought from the Goodwill.
Yeah.
It's just because she was at that time in that place, working in Chelsea Hotel. I think she lived there for some time, and just to be in that art scene.
Yeah.
Of course, her relationship with Robert Mapplethorpe, who is one of the most iconic photographers and artists of that time, also, brought her into that space where all these amazing artists were at the time just living their lives. But now that, time has gone by, and when we talk about...
That's when they made their great works of art, right?
Yes.
That was the time
I
when
actually
it was all
particularly
produced.
like how she's shown her own transition through the book.
Yes.
In different, as a friend and as a partner, and various aspects of her life.
Yes.
So that's very well connected.
And the best part about this book, in my opinion, is that how excellent it is at the sentence level. So there's never any point where, the words are too, you'll have to pick out a dictionary or thesaurus to be what does this word mean? There's no flowery language. But just at a sentence level, she says really simple things in a very elegant way. There's one line where she talks about coming to New York, and she says, "No one expected me, but everything awaited me."
Oh.
Which is really sweet,
Nice.
to think that, you're just moving into this great big city, and you don't know anyone, no one's expecting you to arrive, but everything's awaiting for you to discover, which is a nice thought. And I think later on in the book she talks about, she says, if your paths cross once, they are likely to cross again, which I'm paraphrasing, that isn't an exact quote, but even that, at a sentence level, it's very elegantly written, and it's just a good, like I said, you'll get to meet the greats through this book, which is why it's a good pick.
Sounds like a fascinating read. I'm sure our readers will pick it up.
Yeah. If you want to know what it's like to have a cup of coffee with Andy Warhol, I mean, you should.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So the next two books that we're going to talk about are more to do with writing and writing as a craft, right?
Yes.
So tell us, as a writer, what are your reading preferences before we dive into these books? Do you prefer physical books? Do you read on the Kindle? Do you read online?
So I'm massively tech challenged. I'm getting better. I won't say I'm challenged. I'm a work in progress in that respect. I listen to audiobooks sometimes, or like podcasts and things like that. But when it comes to actually reading, I prefer paperbacks or just physical books because I like to bring them with me wherever I am. And I don't own a Kindle. So I don't know. I've never experienced a Kindle.
Okay.
But yeah, just good old books.
Good old physical books.
Yes.
Great. So the book we're discussing next is The Art of Recklessness by Dean Young.
Yes.
So tell us about this book, Alisha.
So again, this book was assigned to me in college and I held on to it. So in college, my friends and I, we'd often go to the bookstores and, you know, sometimes we'd get books new, but sometimes we would have to buy used copies of books just because there were so many students and everyone was shopping at the same bookstore, which is fine. It really, in the end, it didn't really make a difference. And this is one of those books that I wanted to buy new, but they only had a used copy left. And I still have it to this day. And I'm kind of glad I did because I feel like books really can be passed on from one person to another.
They should be.
They should be.
Yes.
You know, and so I have that. And in this book, it's a sort of a guide on how to write poetry, which can be a little problematic to a lot of people because, you know, oftentimes when people talk about poetry, they think that it's something that, you know, you're sitting in a garden and a thought comes to you and you just put pen to paper and it's all very glamorous and romantic, when in actuality it's not. When I was in college, I remember writing exams and, you know, things like that about poetry, and it was very structured. And I had a professor that told me, you know, you can choose to abandon all the rules. But you have to earn that right to abandon the rules. You must at least know what the rules are before you, you know, sort of throw caution to the wind. And so, you know, grammar, structure, or just the flow, the beat, the themes of those like technical aspects is what this book will teach you. But it teaches you that in a very fun way, because even though it is an instructive book, there is a lot of original content in it. There are other poems, and there's an interesting anecdote in the book where the author writes that, you know, if you want to learn how to make a lobster, you're not going to read a book about poetry. You're going to go read a book about recipes, because that's a bit more like poetry is not as efficient. It's a bit more, you know, the lines are kind of blurred. So, it's just an interesting book. I would recommend to anybody that's interested, not just in poetry writing, but in writing in general, because, you know, writing isn't just something that is an art. It's a craft. At the end of the day, writing is a craft. And
so you have to hone your craft.
There are techniques involved.
And that's actually great advice, because you should know the rules before you even plan on defying them, right?
Exactly.
Like, what is the framework that you should be working in? So,
yes, and, you know, like, if you have to know things like, what is a metaphor? What is alliteration? Like, there's certain technical things, which I'm not saying you need to learn it as if you're preparing for an exam, but just, you know, learning these techniques makes the writing better.
Yeah.
So it's important to know. When I walked into college, I was like, I'm going to be a good writer because I've been writing since I was in high school, and then I realized I know nothing. Right. You know, the rules really they're not rules as much as they are guidelines, skills, you know, like the skill set that you need to hone in.
Right. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense, So have you, is this one of the books that you go back to when you find that you're planning to write, or now you must be planning to write your next book, I'm sure. So is there any one book that you go back to before starting your next project?
Notes or references.
But the next one that I have on my list, Method and Madness, that is, I feel like a staple book.
Okay, so why do you, what's so special about this book that draws you back?
So this is a book written by Alice LaPlante, and it's called Method and Madness, which I have to say, The Art of Recklessness and Method and Madness, just the titles alone, I remember being a young college student and being like, I need to write a book with a title like this one. You know, they're very like
defiant 10,
like attractive titles.
Definitely.
But Method and Madness, I will also say, is the most expensive book on this list.
Okay.
And I clearly remember I walked up to class and I knew that we were going to be assigned, new books for the term. And my professor bought photocopies of this book. And she said, this is a great book, but I know y'all are college students and y'all are not going to pay for this book. Because I think it's like, at the time, it was like $80. I don't know how much it is in the market now. But a significant amount of money for a college student. So she would photocopy her own book. So she'd get like Xerox copies of the book and distribute it to us. And she would be like, at the end of the term, if one of you goes and buys this book, I know I would have done something right. And you know what? Most of us did end up going and buying the book because it's something that I feel I refer to all the time. And the reason is that this book, aside from having a lot of great instructions and, teaching us the techniques and things like that, there's a lot of writing exercises. And as a writer, one of the questions that I get asked most frequently is about writing blocks. Like, what is a writing block? Do you believe in writing blocks? How do you get over writing blocks? And I personally feel like writing blocks don't exist because I think of writing as a job. Right? Like if I was working a regular job, which I have in the past, I just, showed up and said to my boss, oh, today I'm not inspired to write this speech. I'll be thrown out of the office, It's the same with writing. You can't wait for the inspiration to write. And so this book has a lot of writing exercises which really help you get started.
Okay.
So one of the writing exercises my professor would make us do, and I really use this all the time, is that he would say, okay, you put a timer on your phone for 1 minute, grab a pen and paper, and for 1 minute you write. Even if the fire alarm goes off, someone calls your name, you are like non-existent to the world. You write like crap 10 times in a row, but the pen will not stop moving.
Okay.
And sometimes at the end of that 1 minute, it's like almost like a stream of consciousness, and out of that maybe 3 pages of crap, you really do find that one idea that is good. And so like this, there are many other writing exercises in the book which are just to help you get started, because I would recommend to anyone that's hoping to be a writer, firstly, if you're out there, let me know. It seems like we're a dwindling community, but if you're out there, treat writing like a job. It's an important, beautiful thing, but at the end of it, treat it like a job. Don't wait for the inspiration to come to you. Just, keep on. You have to keep at it.
I think that's the key. Like, even in one of our earlier podcasts with the ED at Harvard Business School, we spoke about a book called How Will You Measure Your Life? And it talks about treating relationships like a job, so that you do not take them for granted. So they're like the most meaningful relationships in your life are those which you should treat like you would treat your job, so you can do justice to them. So, yeah, maybe this is, how you should be dealing with it.
Yeah, and it ties back to, like we were speaking about, one of Malcolm Gladwell's other books, Outliers. In which he talks about the 10,000 hours you need to do to be a specialist in whatever it is that you're doing. It kind of like, these writing exercises from Method and Madness, it does tie into that. It's not enough to be good at what you do. It's also important to keep practicing what you do. And the writing exercises really do help anybody that has writing aspirations. It could be any genre. You could be a script writer. You could write poetry, fiction. It's meant to be for fiction, but I find that those exercises can be applied to whatever genre, that even if you have to write, honestly, a press release or whatever that because writing is such a part of our lives, we don't even realize it. Regardless of your job, you're probably, whether it's writing an email or a presentation or
you're
whatever.
Doing some sort of writing in your day-to-day
always,
without fail, right?
Words really are the foundation of all human experience, I feel. We make sense of everything with words.
Well, that's really profound.
Yeah. Would you like to end with, one of your favorite quotes before we, end the podcast? Like anything that really stands out for you in life or you look up to?
I don't know. I don't think I've written that yet.
Okay,
hopefully in the future.
So we'll have you back on another episode once you've written that. So great. Thank you very much for being with us, Alisha.
Thank you. It was great being here.
Has Everything Been Done is available on Amazon,
yes,
as well as most major retailers.
Yes, e-retailers, Kindle, we're all over the place, and hopefully starting this month, at this end of this month, we will be in 15 bookstores across the country, and hopefully that number grows.
Wow, great. And a big thank you to all our listeners. You can follow the Open Library Project on LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook for latest updates on our events, and stay tuned for the next Paperback podcast on IVM Podcasts. Happy reading. You can follow IVM Podcasts on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at IVM Podcasts.
Advertising is dead. Yep, you heard me right. Advertising is dead. We're all in the content business now. Let's not call it news, TV, radio, etc., etc. It's all content, and we're in the middle of this weirdly exciting phase where all the borders and lines that have been drawn over decades has been swept away by this lovely thing called the internet. We're a show where we don't dwell on just the stuff that is now, but rather the wider stuff about advertising, media, content, and the whole goddamn circus surrounding it. Tune in every Tuesday for our weekly unboxing of the mystery box we used to call advertising. I'm Varun Dugirala, co-founder and content chief at The Glitch, and this is my new podcast, Advertising is Dead.
Hey Meghnad, do you know how to citizen?
Hey Shreyas, do you know how to citizen?
Hey Meghnad, do you know how to citizen?
Hey Shreyas, let's just do a podcast about it.
Let's do a podcast about it. A podcast is called How to Citizen. In every episode, we get a new guest and discuss one chapter from the 8th grade civics textbook. Think about it as three friends revising before a test, and we go back to school. There's nostalgia, there's trauma, there are lunch breaks, there are favorite teachers, there are horrible teachers, there's everything.
So every Tuesday, we bring in a guest on the podcast and we ask them a very simple question. Do you know how to citizen?
Meghnad, I think the question is, do you know how to citizen?
But Shreyas, I'm asking you this question.